All right, as I've mentioned a number of times, about a year and a half ago, took a couple of trips to the border. It's like a ghost town because the policy of remain in Mexico that the previous administration, the Trump administration, put in place really just stopped the flow of illegal immigrants coming across the border. Well, the Biden administration has taken that fix, trashed it, and turned the border into a fiasco. This week, the Republican Study Committee and its chairman, Congressman Jim Banks, a frequent guest on our program, organized a trip to the southern border for about 24 House Republicans, many which saw with their own eyes for the first time the humanitarian crisis that is taking place there. Joining me now to talk about what she witnessed last night and about her meeting with former President Trump and Texas Governor Greg Abbott at the border today is Congresswoman Mary Miller. She was a part of the delegation. She represents the 15th Congressional District of Illinois. Congresswoman Miller, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm thankful to be on, and I'm thankful to be here with President Trump to discuss this critical national security issue. Illinois is a sanctuary state, and most unfortunately, the Biden administration, because I believe they're motivated by hatred toward Trump, they dismantled all the successful policies that he had put in place, and now we have a national security and a humanitarian crisis here at the border.
I want to talk about that humanitarian crisis because you saw that firsthand last night. Describe to our listeners what you saw last night.
Yeah. Well, of course, it was dark. I think it was midnight or 1 o'clock. Quite a few groups of women and children. There were no men with them. There were teenage boys. When we informed them that they had crossed the border, they were in the United States, they got big smiles on their faces. They were coming from Guatemala. They'd walked for 2 months. I have to say, they didn't feel threatened. They were well-dressed. They were clean. Their shoes were actually cleaner than mine. It was muddy out there last night. They looked well-fed. They had young children and babies with them. One woman looked like she was 13 or 14. She told me she was 17. She had a very small baby strapped to her back. They weren't carrying, a lot of them didn't even have backpacks. So they apparently were getting help along the way. They said they paid a cartel $200 to come. So that's very cheap. I am guessing they don't understand what kind of arrangements they made. There were a couple children that teenagers picked up along the way. There was a little boy. He said he was 8. He had a backpack, and he took his birth certificate out, and he had a phone number on a piece of paper. He had been abandoned, and the teenage girls picked him up. And then there was an even younger little girl. It was just very heartbreaking, 6 years old, or 5 or 6, I'm guessing. I thought she was not alive. We could not rouse her at all, but we definitely determined she was alive. But she was so exhausted. And I think my staff, I did take a picture of her. For some reason, she had little winter mittens on her hands, and she had a little doll curled up with her. It's super heart-wrenching. And of course, I'm a mom of 7 children, grandma of many, many children, and I love children, and I just cried. But then just to think how people in our country, we have got professors and politicians and athletes that are trashing our country. It is the most free and the land of opportunity that's ever existed. And here these people are forsaking their homeland, walking for 2 months to go into an unknown, really, except what Biden's advertised that they are waiting for. But, what a contrast there is.
It is. And we saw this during the Obama years when the borders were open then as well, that people would come to this country despite all of the things that are said about the country, those that would trash the country. They still want to come because you're absolutely right. This is a land of opportunity, but there's a way to do it in which people don't have to risk their lives. And not only do you have those individuals coming across, but I'm sure in your briefings that the Border Patrol is talking about the drugs that are coming across, the human trafficking that's taking place. Those are issues that are being facilitated by this lack of enforcement at the border.
Definitely that there's unprecedented levels of illegal migration, human trafficking, drug smuggling. I'm sure that terrorists are helping themselves to cross, violent criminals and gangs, diseases, definitely COVID, but we know there's other diseases coming. And the thing that strikes me is that the first duty of government is to protect its citizens. And on every front, Biden and his administration are not protecting the people. Border security translates into home security, and people want to feel safe in their communities. And then add that to defunding and demoralizing the police, where they're wanting to quit, then this transgender agenda where they want to put men in women's private spaces. They want to take our guns. Biden's talking about executive orders to diminish our Second Amendment rights and our ability to defend ourselves. They're negotiating with terrorists in the Middle East. They're cozying up to China. In every way, they are not protecting us. They're making us vulnerable on every front.
I appreciate you and Congressman Banks and the others that went down to the border to see this firsthand and tell that story, because Americans are not getting it from the legacy media. They don't want to talk about it because this is a vulnerability for Democrats right now, because you're absolutely right. They're making America vulnerable. Congresswoman Miller, thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.